Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Scott Lehigh, here with fellow Boston Globe columnist Joan Vanocchi and two veterans of presidential campaigns past. Tomorrow marks the first of this campaign's presidential debates, and that's our topic today. We're very pleased to have with us David Wade and Stephanie Cutter. Stephanie, the founder of the strategy and marketing firm Precision, was the deputy 2012 campaign manager for Barack Obama. She also worked for John Kerry's presidential campaign, and she was a top aide to former U.S. Senator Edward M. Kennedy. David, a public affairs strategist, was the national traveling press secretary for Kerry's presidential campaign and the traveling communication chief for Joe Biden's 2008 vice presidential campaign. So guys, tell us a little about how your campaign got ready for the first debate, in Kerry's case against George W. Bush and Obama's against Mitt Romney. And did that preparation leave them ready? And did it go as expected? Stephanie, maybe we'll start with you. David, you're coming in kind of on the horizontal from where I see you. There you go. There we go. Steph, take it away. What did you think? How did it go?
Well, first, thanks for having us. It's great to be talking with the Boston Globe, a paper that I used to deal with all the time, as you guys know. And it's also great to be with my former colleague and friend, David Wade. So how did John Kerry prepare for the first debate? If you remember way back when, at that time, we were just coming off of a tumultuous August and beginning of September dealing with Swift votes. So the debates were really important for John Kerry to reestablish himself and really change the narrative of the election. Debates are one of the few times where you can change the topic, the discussion, and the overall setting of the election. You can disrupt the election with those debates. It was critical for us to do that. At that time. Kerry is a great debater, and we spent most of the time really figuring out what case do we really want to prosecute against George Bush. And obviously the war had dominated much of the discussion of the race, but really the economy was the number one issue in the race, yet nobody was talking about it. So we spent most of our time drilling down on what is the case that we want to prosecute on the economy, and what is the better alternative that we can provide. So that's how we prepared. I'll let Wade weigh in here also, because he was sitting next to me at the time.
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, Scott and Joan and the Globe, thank you very much for having us. It's a great chance to talk politics with Stephanie again after working with and learning from her over many years. When I sort of think back to particularly to 2004 and to those debates, one thread that just jumps out at me is how different preparing for this year's presidential debates must be. If there was a single best source of information for the candidate to consume, it was from watching his opponent do 3-4 rallies a day. It was from watching interviews that were happening in real time when President Bush was engaging with the media. But the very nature of COVID, I think, has changed unfortunately, how both teams have to prepare this year and create a really unusual dynamic, as well as, we're still preparing for debates in an era that was obviously email, blogs were just beginning to really have an impact as a place where people went to consume news. But social media as a primary place where people got information, and the balkanization of information that has come along with that was not yet a factor, whereas today it's obviously ubiquitous, and you wonder how much the nature of preparing for a debate has changed, knowing that so much of how America is going to get the news of this debate is going to come in the form of GIFs and memes that may well, populate social media and be driving the conversation after even the opening minutes of the debate. People think about those famous moments in previous debates, 1992, when President Bush 41 looked at his watch. Imagine that in a culture now of GIFs and memes.
Well, that sort of brings us to question Joan wanted to ask here about doing this in the Trump era, and let's go to her.
Thank you, Scott. I was hoping you'd let me ask him. Well, we all know that Trump is the great disruptor, and that's going to be the, I guess, the challenge for Joe Biden. During the 2016 primary season, Trump terrorized his Republican opponents, and he tried to do a version of that with Hillary Clinton. Not as successful, I don't think, but whatever, he tried. So if you're in the room with Joe Biden right now, what do you tell him about handling the disruption that you know you're going to get?
So I'll take a first stab at that, and then David, please chime in. I think that Trump is really a one-trick pony, right? The only thing he can do is try to disrupt and try to divert from something that he doesn't want to talk about, like coronavirus. This year, there is no real audience. There are some people in the audience, but it is really a fraction of what normally is there, and they're socially distanced. So the idea that he can play games with the audience like he did in 2016 has been really minimalized. I think that Biden is probably ready for this. What I would be telling him is, like, don't get sucked down that rabbit hole every time he tries to bring you down it, because that's less time you have to make your case to the American people, which is really who you're talking to. You're not talking to Trump. You're not trying to correct every lie he's telling or answer every insult that he's lobbing at you. People know that about him already. What they don't know, as much as they should right now, is what you're going to do to fix it, what you're going to do to change things, what you're going to do to put this country back on track and build us back better, to use his words. That is the primary goal of these debates, for Joe Biden to be talking to the person sitting at home, sitting on their couch, watching these debates, and making sure they learn something that night about Biden and what he'll do for this country, coming from Biden, unfiltered, straight from Biden's mouth, what he will do, because that is what is most important. In terms of the fact checking and the lies and things that Trump is going to do, I think there are moments that Biden can address that. I think it would be helpful if he had some sort of a frame similar to Ronald Reagan, like, there you go again. And I'll leave it to him to come up with the appropriate words are, but he needs something to be able to shut that down and put Trump in his place where he should be, sort of making him look like he's superfluous to this debate, that he's not serious in the.
Let me ask this though, David, what if it's just something as simple as here Trump is, and he kind of went over and stood behind Hillary. And I remember, he's not the only one who's done that. I remember Al Gore in the debate with George W. went over and kind of left his podium or his whatever it was and walked over, looked quizzically at, and I remember George W. looked around and kind of nodded at him sarcastically and went on with his answer. But it was obviously, in both cases, an intimidation tactic. Mm-hmm. What would you do, David, what would you tell Biden to do if all of a sudden Trump comes lumbering over at him?
Or if he calls him Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple things that are different here than in 2016 if Trump tries the Trumpian tactics. Number one, there was a story in the Globe about a week ago about a guy who bought a house in Somerville that came with a 3,000-pound safe that he couldn't get it out the window and he couldn't get it down the stairs. That's Trump's record. And that is what is different than 2016. It is not Donald Trump showman, the idea of Donald Trump. It's not Donald Trump celebrity. It's Donald Trump in a country where 200,000 people have died this year from a pandemic. And overwhelmingly, the country does not believe he's answered it. And I think some of those tactics for which he is so known just don't wear as well in this kind of a situation. And the other takeaway is, I think, Scott, to your point, you think about that Bush moment in 2000. Sometimes a little bit of humor that punctures the image of a bully can actually be much more effective than fact-checking every point or losing your cool and answering that way.
Fair or not, I was just going to say, fair or not, Trump has also sort of raised the issue of Biden's mental acuity, however you want to frame it. It's cruel and it's immature, the Sleepy Joe stuff, and at rallies saying that he's going to get a great big shot before the debate. What's the bar that Biden has to pass? I mean, is there a test that he has to pass with the debate audience, given that Trump has tried so hard to make that an issue?
Well, I think Trump has really lowered expectations for Biden. And, you know, last week his campaign kind of got themselves in a box as Trump is out there calling him Sleepy Joe and challenging his mental acuity. His campaign team was talking about what a great debater Joe Biden was. So they couldn't quite figure out how they wanted to set expectations for this debate. I think in the end, they lowered expectations. And I think that anytime Biden appears publicly and people see him, they realize that Trump is full of, you know what? And I think that that probably will be evident tomorrow night. What bar does Biden have to cross? Biden has to go out there and be himself. You know, he doesn't have to, you know, I guess we need to decide what the version of what the definition of winning this debate is. And
well, let's take a whack at that. David, what do you think? What wins this for, you know Joe Biden very well. What wins this for Biden in your estimation?
Well, I think keeping this race in many ways as a referendum on how Donald Trump has led the country, and keeping the focus on those issues and not sort of chasing the rabbits that Trump is going to want the race to be about, all the distractions and diversions, keeping the focus on those core issues and calmly, I think, presenting a vision of how things could have been different in the year of the pandemic and how they will be different with a presidency that restores leadership. I think that's where the bar is. I also think that, you know, that's where the bar is going to be set by the audiences. You know, I'm always reminded, think about the gap sometimes between elites and pundits and how they approach a debate. And perhaps they tend to focus more sometimes on style points and on the best quips or the best one-liners. An awful lot of how an audience at home digests this is about who they're comfortable with, who seems to care about them and be speaking to them. And I actually think that's one of the traps that Trump sets for himself when he wants to make it about his opponent or about applauding himself. He's forgetting that the person tuning in wants to know what you're going to do that matters to their lives. And that's a very different bar.
Well, you both have mentioned, you know, sort of the memorable moments that come out of these debates. So I'm going to give you a chance to beat up on the media a little bit. You know, looking way back, for those of us of a certain age, the modern televised debate is really, you know, Kennedy-Nixon. And I didn't cover that one, I promise that. But what we know from, you know, reading about it and learning about it is everybody remembers that Nixon was sweating and that Kennedy was tan and handsome. And nobody really remembers what I think either one of them said, at least all these years later.
mm-hmm.
And with all these moments, I know I'm guilty of them. You meant Gore versus Bush in 2000, Gore sighing. I'm sure I wrote a column about that in my instant analysis afterwards. How much does that sort of frame the public perception, and how much are the media responsible for, in the end, substance not really being all that important, that these debate moments are how we remember them and how they become framed? That's an easy question, right? I'm giving you a softball.
I do think it's a balance, but I also think in some ways, some of these moments that sometimes get dismissed as style points are actually more than that, right? I mean, I think if President Bush 41 in 1992 hadn't been perceived going into the debate as aloof from the economy and as not focused on the recession the country had lived through, him glancing down on his watch might well not have had quite the impact that moment had. It wouldn't have taken on a life of its own. I actually think a lot of these moments that everyone focuses on are moments that affirm an instinct the country and those who've been watching have about a candidate and about the race. You know, and that, again, that can be a positive or a negative. I mean, Governor Clinton in 1992 walking towards the woman in the town hall who asked that question and empathizing similarly became symbolic about that race.
Stephanie, to what degree do you look for going in saying, hey, you know, we're obviously going to be in the game through the entirety of this debate, but we also want sort of a debate highlight moment or two or three to get on, you know, that will make the news, that people who only see, you know, 5 minutes of this will be sure to encounter and try to make a moment like that?
Well, you know, you don't want to over-script it, and you kind of have to have a good understanding of your candidate and what their style is. Certainly, there's a lot of prep that goes into this where you look to make a moment on the issues that you care about, what your biggest differentiator is with your opponent. And that, you know, in 2012, you know, there were several moments in the debates with between Obama and Romney. Not the first debate, which was pretty much a disaster, but for the second debate, I remember, you know, Obama going after. Well, actually, Romney was attacking Obama on how he probably in his pension fund probably had investments in China and other places. And asked Obama to go look at his pension fund, and it opened up a door. You know, our whole thesis was to show that Romney was for the big guys and Obama was for the little guys, the working people. And Obama stepped in and said, "Well, I haven't looked at my pension because it's not as big as yours." And it became one of the takeaways from that debate because it symbolized what we had hoped people would see as the real differences in the race. So that particular moment, you know, talking about the pensions wasn't planned because we didn't know Romney was going to go there. But the whole idea of making the distinction between them about Romney being for those at the very top, the top 1%, and Obama caring about the middle class and those trying to enter the middle class was our entire framework of going into those debates.
Obama is like one of the cases where he actually was seen as the winner of the debates and won the election. If we look back at Kerry for a minute, right? I think the consensus was that he won all the debates with George W. Bush. And there was talk during one of the debates, I'm not sure which one, that Bush had some sort of device under his suit jacket and was he getting answers and all that. So Kerry won the debates, but lost the election. So to get back to Scott's question, what does it take to win, and what does it take to make the win then an election day win?
Or do they change things? Do debates really change
How
things?
does it disrupt? So what the debates did for Kerry, it allowed him to recover from swift votes. All of his character attributes shot way up after the first debate, and only grew in between the second and third. We came out of those debates even if not ahead in most battlegrounds. So it reset the race for us coming out of the debates. We came into those debates injured. We came out reestablished and set. The difference is, you know, it's difficult to unseat an incumbent president. And if you remember, the Obama tapes came out, I think the Friday before. David, is that right? The Friday before the election, where did I say Obama or Osama?
You mean Osama, the Osama.
Yes. Osama came out the Friday before the election saying that he wanted John Kerry to win. And that, you know, that made everybody remember George Bush was the guy that was there on 9/11. And George Bush has also been telling us over the past year that John Kerry, you know, is a flip-flopper and he's not telling the truth about his medals. And all of that came rushing back. And we ended up losing. So debates matter. They are not the thing that will allow you to win. They are the thing that you can use to disrupt the race and put you on a different footing going into the end of the campaign. But they are not like the golden egg that's going to allow you to win.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, you know, but what they are, I mean, number one, Stephanie is entirely correct. If you look at the coverage heading into that first debate for Kerry against Bush, and that was the debate about national security that the Bush campaign had insisted to go first, which was considered a major disadvantage for our campaign. Kerry, we were coming in, we were pulling out of some battleground states. All of the news was bad. 24 hours later, we get on the plane and the cover of Newsweek is off the ropes. It as she said, it reset the dynamic. And that is the difference debates can make. And the reason why is because after months of caricature on both sides, the country gets to look up and see these two people side by side and sort of take their own stock. And if they don't fit the caricature, then they start to reevaluate. And I do think that's actually, again, that's one of the dangers for Trump, is the way that he has tried to define Vice President Biden is not going to be who the country sees when they see Vice President Biden on that stage.
And I thought in the primary debates, I did not think Biden did horribly, but I didn't think he did particularly well when there was a big field and you really had to work for your moment. But when it got to be one-on-one with Bernie Sanders, I thought he won that thing hands down. I didn't think it was close. And Bernie, I'm not saying he's a great debater, but he certainly has lines that he repeats over and over and over again. And I thought Biden just took him apart. It wasn't really close. So I kind of feel, David, the way you do, that Trump has set expectations quite low. And I think he's got more than his match in Joe Biden here. Because Biden, not a wonderful debater, but certainly more than competent, I would say.
Well, let me play the devil's advocate here for a moment. Can Trump do anything to help himself in this debate tomorrow? The polls aren't looking really good for him right now. He's kind of the loose cannon who goes crazy at rallies and press conferences. Is there any way he could salvage what people who aren't, in love with him think about him?
I mean, it would be out of character for Trump to present himself as calm and presidential, and as the way that I think most, probably his campaign might well advise him to show up. It would obviously be out of character for him when he seems to typically write his own script and his own playbook.
I also think if he showed some empathy towards the people who have lost their lives and the families who have endured the COVID epidemic, that would go a long way. He has yet to do that. We're almost 8 months into this, and he's never expressed any empathy for anybody.
Except himself. I saw him talking again the other day about how mean people are to him and how horribly he's treated. But well, let's do this just for a minute, guys. One of the things I think about when I think about debates is the big moments. And I gotta say, they essentially strike me mostly as things you remember negatively. Jerry Ford saying that there was no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe and sort of shocking everyone. The Mike Dukakis question, what would you do if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, and him responding like it was just a matter of, effective law enforcement would be his reputation. Stephanie, you mentioned, I think, or David maybe, H.W. looking at his watch. And then I think Gore, I think he won those debates, but his exasperation and sighing and walking from the podium didn't really work that well, I don't think so. And Stephanie, you said Obama not doing that well in the first one. I mean, is there a larger potential to sort of screw up here than there is to have a shining moment?
Well, I think it's different for each of them. Trump is behind. So if you're behind, you really do need a shining moment for these debates to matter for you. If you're ahead, you need to not make a mistake, but be able to prosecute your case against your opponent. It is a referendum on Trump, but also put yourself forward as somebody who can take us to a better place as a country. So the stakes are different for each one of them. The stakes are pretty high for Trump. If he's going to disrupt the last 5 weeks of this race, he's got to start tomorrow night and figure out what that is. And the second thing for Trump is it's not just winning the debate, but he's got to figure out how he's going to attract new voters. He's done nothing to expand his base. He's only campaigning to a sliver of this country. He needs to attract some of those new voters who are either on the fence about him and Biden, or some of his voters that have already gone over to Biden. And it'll be interesting to see whether that's even top of mind for him tomorrow night.
And just to add to that, I mean, he really, in one sense, and perhaps by repeating some of his case with perhaps more nuanced language about the Supreme Court. Trump may actually have, in some ways, more room to grow because he's fallen so far. He may be able to move back some true Republican voters who have been identifying themselves as undecideds. If he hits some of those tones, he may move them back to the Republican column. But as Stephanie said, in some ways, it might be a bit of a dead cat bounce for him. He has got to prove that he can reassemble a coalition that he built in 2016 that relied on winning states like Wisconsin that hadn't been won by a Republican since 1988. That's very hard to do while simultaneously trying to rev up a Republican base and pull some of those undecideds back to your column. He has a big challenge.
I think we're supposed to go to some questions from other people, but like one last thing, let's talk about the moderator for a moment. And people have raised the issue of how much fact checking should go on and what should the role of the moderator be. Back in 2012, actually, Candy Crowley got into a lot of trouble. She was criticized for fact checking Romney when he said Obama didn't call the Benghazi attack a terrorist attack. But have things gotten to the point now where we should expect the moderator to do fact checking?
Well, one thing that was also different in 2012 was that she was invited into that dispute by the candidates. President Obama said, check the tapes, check the record, and that happened in real time, and she announced it. I do think no moderator wants to see an entire debate consumed by that kind of back and forth and tit for tat, but I would not. But at a moment when someone raises the question and one of the candidates raises the question, I don't think that that's by any means out of bounds.
Wallace has already said in 2016, he said, my job is not a fact checker. And he has recently said that it's a successful debate if you end the debate and you don't even realize I was there. So it seems that he doesn't think it's his job to fact check. But there's a lot you can do with how you ask a question, in how you present something to the candidates, where you cut people off to go to the next question. It's unclear. What is true, though, is that regardless of what Wallace does or the two candidates do, there is a massive fact-checking operation happening at the networks, at the papers, on the campaigns, outside groups. So I'm not worried about people hearing something from Trump that's not true and believing it. Even his base, I can't remember what poll it was, even a large portion of his own base thinks that he lies. So it would be great if he acknowledged the truth on some things and then went on from there. I don't think that's going to happen. So the presumption is what he's saying is just not true.
Well, I got to say that's a huge concern, though. That's one of the most frequent questions we've had from people setting this up. Doesn't the moderator need to fact check? And I share your guys' opinion. It's not really the moderator's job; it's the candidate's job. But I think it's a little bit difficult for a candidate if someone is as loose with the facts as Trump, and you're trying to say, is that true or not? You've got to have a certain amount of confidence in rebutting them. Because there are so many flights of fancy that he takes just on a moment's notice. But I think you're right, Stephanie, that there will be there will be an industry fact checking this just as soon as the thing is over. Mm-hmm. How about the issue of other topics? Another thing people have asked us a lot is, guys, climate change is an existential issue, and shouldn't it be something that's huge here in these debates? And what if you are, Trump obviously doesn't believe in it, but you're Joe Biden and you want to make the point. David, what would you do? What do you say?
Well, I think, number one, you're absolutely right, and your readers are right. It's astonishing to think that in 2016, there was not a single question about climate change in any of the presidential debates. But I remember something, obviously they've announced the topics for tomorrow night. Climate change is not one of them for the initial debate. If there's a decision that you want to, as a candidate, push that issue into the debate, you can do the kind of thing that John Kerry did in 2004. The first debate was set to be entirely about national security. We were going to debate on that topic. and we had a lot to prove on that topic. But there was a way to interject the economy or energy security and still fit within the debate, but try to create a moment, especially in the first 10 minutes when the audience is the largest, when oftentimes the news for the debate gets set, to find a way to say, for example, back then it was the real national security is a strong economy here at home that lets us be strong in the world, and then talk about jobs. There are ways, even within many of these topics, whether it's racial justice, other ways to bring climate change front and center.
Just to jump right off that, one reader or one listener sends a note in to say the one area where Trump consistently seems to do better than Biden is the economy. Now, David, you mentioned that the way you guys found a way to get the economy into that debate. Should in some way Biden try to take the economy away from Trump in this?
Absolutely. And I mean, we know the economy is going to come up, and this is an area that the more facts out there on what Trump is saying on the economy, the less of the shiny veneer on the economy for him stays. It wears off. When you compare the facts of where the economy is today, or even where it was a year ago compared to the economy that he inherited. The other thing that we haven't talked about, but is sort of the 800-pound gorilla, is the story that's out about his taxes, that he paid $750 worth of taxes. Now, a lot of the campaigns and pundits are talking about, how nurses and firefighters and teachers and basically everybody else in America pays more than Donald Trump. The other element of that story that really struck me is that he's really a bad businessman. Every single one of his properties is failing, and he has a long history of failed ventures. Squandered $400 million of his inheritance, and he's in debt for $412 million now. We don't know who those debtors are. Who wants to run a business like that? And it's indicative of how he's run the country. He's run up the debt, cares only about himself and how he benefits, and doesn't do the hard work to make sure that there's a strong foundation for this economy for success over the long term. It's very indicative of how he has run the country.
The other thing we haven't really talked about, although David, you mentioned it, is the Supreme Court nomination. And you said, I think, that it gives Trump a little bit of a chance of a reset and kind of a positive theme. So what should Joe Biden do? How should he handle the question of the Supreme Court nominee and the push by some Democrats to, pack the court?
I think, Trump has an opportunity in a sense on that issue, but it's a way to sort of get some of the parts of his base that have been questioning him to try to move them back into his column. I think it's more that than it is a way to really grow headed towards election day. But I actually think, a lot of what I have read has been Democrats who are at times nervous about how particularly Democrats in the Senate might talk about these issues and about this fight coming up. I actually think this is one area where having Vice President Biden as your nominee is a big strength, which is that as a Catholic who's leaned on his faith throughout his life in very, very searing personal and public ways that I think the country identifies with, and the country identifies with his character, Trump is going to have a much harder time affixing some of the anti-Catholic and other labels that he and the Republican Party want to attach to Democrats. I think that's a very hard case to make against Vice President Biden, who, again, as a former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, is somebody who has fought on these issues for a long time, is very effective about them, and about talking about the fact that not only are certain rights on the line with the court battle, but I think Biden has a great ability to make it very clear that what was the number one issue in 2018 for people who went to the polls was healthcare, that healthcare and the fight for people's rights for those with pre-existing conditions, all of those things hang in the balance with the court. And I presume that is the big argument that you would want to make.
What about the whole issue of the women's vote, Stephanie? Trump is really doing badly, according to the polls. Is there any way to get them back? Not that I want him to, but.
I mean, the gender gap is enormous this year. You know, Biden is up over 30 points with all women, and he's even if not slightly ahead amongst white women without college degrees, which is a big deal compared to where we were in 2016. You know, I think that women generally, and I am a woman, but I don't want to speak for all women out there, they're just tired of the divisiveness and the constant crisis and chaos coming out of the Trump White House. And they're looking for some stability so that, you know, maybe a president could think about them. Maybe a president could put an agenda on the table that actually addresses their needs. That hasn't happened over the past 3+ years. I'm not sure how, I don't think it's probably possible for this president to win them back. He has tried by being the strong man in the race and trying to paint Biden as the person who's going to, you know, take away our suburbs with massive violence, breaking out into the streets if Biden is president. That's just not believable with Biden. People aren't buying it. And that's the thing with these attacks. You really have to think about, based on who your opposition is this going to stick? And, you know, we could have told you a year ago it wasn't going to stick on Biden. And I'm sure we'll see some of that strongman stuff tomorrow night, but it hasn't worked. It hasn't moved the polls, and it certainly hasn't moved women. So I think at this point, absent a major mea culpa from Donald Trump and a real presidential-like performance tomorrow night, with detail about what the second term is really going to look like, I just don't see him winning any women back.
I just want to combine two questions that people have asked you. They're asking what do you think the toughest question, the toughest attack that Trump will come at him with, and they're also saying what should he do if Trump does the drug test? I challenge you to a drug test to see if you're taking something to make you sharper. And what do you do if he levels an attack on Hunter? I know those are kind of from left field questions, but any thoughts on either of those topics?
David, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
He's supposed to talk about Don Jr. if he brings up Hunter, but go ahead.
Say, well, Bo was my good son. Hunter, he's a bit of a screw up. No. But what do you say? What do you say?
I think that, Trump is absolutely going to go after Hunter because he knows that there's nobody on earth more important to Joe Biden than his children. I'm sure that Biden is prepared for this and prepared to have the appropriate amount of indignation. And I don't think it's in Biden's nature to throw it back at Trump and his own children. What I would suggest, and I'm sure they have thought this through a million times, is to repeat, Donald, I know you like to levy this attack because you think it's going to rattle me. This has been looked into, and there was no wrongdoing, and you know it. I'm not going to bring up your family because I don't think it's right. I think this is all a distraction of the issues that matter in this race, like the 200,000 people who have died because of coronavirus because of your inept response, or the 7 million people who have contracted coronavirus who will be living with pre-existing conditions for the rest of their lives, and you're in court trying to take those protections away from them. That's what this race is about.
So you would move it, you would pivot and move to a question that brought.
I would, be a little indignant, like, here you go again, and then move right back to the issues that people are really wondering about this race. Nobody out there is wondering about Hunter Biden.
You'd go high, like Michelle Obama says, when they go low.
Right.
You'd be going high a lot in that debate, I think.
I think you always need to defend, but you want to defend quickly, and you want to get to a point that actually makes Trump vulnerable. And I think some variation of, and they have brilliant people who have been working this through, undoubtedly, and I'm sure that they're prepared because Donald Trump telegraphs every attack daily on Twitter. But I think, some variation of, after you've defended your family, of saying, you want to talk about my family because you can't talk about the 200,000 families that are missing a loved one at the table this year because we've had the most incompetent response to a pandemic in any country in the world. And go then to where Trump is vulnerable and run up the score using the bulk of your answer to really take him to task for that.
David, you actually have played an opponent in some of the mock debates, I believe, right? When you do that, do you let's say you're playing Trump, for example, and he's going to come after your guy and nasty stuff. Is it hard to sort of act like he would act and attack your candidate who's your friend and really go at him hard on something that you think is going to come at him?
Yeah, I can't imagine playing Donald Trump. Being a part of a team that was playing Mitt Romney, there were occasionally those moments where someone would say, would he really say that? And you would usually pull out a transcript of a couple speeches and say, actually, yes, these are actual words out of his mouth. And that's why we want to be ready for them. With Trump, because you, in some ways, never know where he'll go. You could never have predicted that literally 24 hours before a debate, an incumbent president would be challenging someone to take a drug test. You really, I assume, have to fish for every possible bizarre statement that could happen, so that, not because you necessarily think he would do it, but so that you aren't surprised or rattled if something totally bizarre does come out of his mouth. And so that you feel that, your candidate is going to be comfortable knowing this is one of these crazy statements that I want to deflect, or this is something I want to respond to.
That's the whole thing with Trump, though. You can't really prepare, right? He can and will do and say anything.
Although vice presidential debates rarely have had much impact. Sometimes we remember them, like we remember Dukakis' running mate Boyd Benson against Dan Quayle. But people should remember in 2008, when Senator Biden was preparing to debate Governor Palin. Sarah Palin, in many ways, at that point, she was a overnight sensation. She was a celebrity. She was sort of Trump before Trump. And in that sense, he's actually had an experience debating someone who kind of fits that mold. And in some ways, there was almost a greater degree of difficulty, in the sense that there were so much from the press about, you have to make sure that you're careful with Governor Palin. You're not condescending towards Governor Palin, or a senator who talks too much with a governor who has a lot of quips. I think Vice President Biden has had a career and some unique experiences in politics that prepare him for this moment.
Great. Guys, I think we've run out of time. I want to thank you both very much for doing this. Stephanie, you were absolutely terrific. David, that was great. Joan, you were much better than I was. Thank you, all you guys, for tuning in. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you'll come next time for our next Top Talk.
Thanks for having us.
For having us.
Thanks, it was fun.